Good morning, everyone. Today what we're going to talk about is artificial intelligence and how we can integrate that in the public sector. Just so you're aware, AI is not a new concept. It's actually been around since the 1950s. We started with the Dartmouth Conference, which is basically where the phrase artificial intelligence was coined. And in that particular meeting, researchers and scientists were trying to figure out ways that we could utilize things such as machine learning. So it's not a brand new concept. So today what we're trying to figure out is how can we best utilize this at the state of Michigan's Department of Technology, Management, and Budget. And please let me know if you have questions. We'll save those for the end. Alright, so the first thing I wanted to address is the reasons why we might want to move to AI. This is not unfamiliar to us as managers at the state. First of all, we've had a loss of employees. Some of that's due to retirement because we have baby boomers who are now moving out of the field. But our biggest problem is the fact that we have employees leaving the public sector in order to receive jobs that have similar pay structures as well as fully remote positions. Now, a lot of that comes from the impact of the pandemic that happened in 2019. What we ended up with is we basically took our work environment that was 5 days a week in office and we turned it into basically a panic structure to where we all worked from home for 2 years. So what we're faced with now is as we move more to a hybrid situation, we have a lot of employees that say, you know what, if I can work remote and be with my family, or if I can work remote for the same amount of pay and not have to travel an hour or two to the work site, I'm going to do it for that similar amount of pay, or for more in some situations. The next issue that we have is smaller candidate pools. A few years ago, we had 55,000 government employees. Today, it's around 48,000 in the state of Michigan. So what that means is now we're in a situation where there's work overload and employee burnout. So if we look at the candidate pool situation, there's a need to reorganize positions in order to provide more efficient services to customers. A lot of that is whenever we have different areas that are customer facing, we want to still provide the same products and services, but how do we do that with less employees? The next thing is to relieve the workload burden from employees. It would be really nice if we could take away the burden of them having to do their own job or what matches their position description, as well as lower ranking items. And then we need to allow employees to focus more on difficult tasks. We talk about that over and over again here, about how we have a lot of tasks that are mundane and day to day, and we want to take those away from employees because there's a thought on management's side of employees wonder, why do I have to do these things that seem kind of redundant or seem as if they're below my pay grade? Well, a lot of that's due to the smaller candidate pools and the loss of employees. So the next thing that we have is we want to eliminate employee burnout. Well, how do we do that? Well, I don't know. We haven't figured out a way to fix that problem. And then we have major cost savings. So what we could do is, if this were a statistical analysis or what we consider to be a quantitative study, we can actually look and analyze to see how much the state will save if we're having to hire less employees, provide less benefits, and also having to focus less on training and things of that nature. But this type of study, we really can't do that with. All right, next we'll talk about our stakeholders. Who's this important to? First of all, those receiving state services. Second, public sector providers. So that would be our state employees. Then managers and policymakers. Alright, so this particular study has several research questions that I'm going to discuss. First of all, what are the reported challenges associated with integrating AI into government organizations? Second, what are the benefits associated with integrating AI in government organizations? And then third, the big question that we're all trying to find out: should the state of Michigan's Department of Technology, Management and Budget integrate AI into their workspace? And if so, how do we do it? Alright, when we talk about the research design, like I said, this is not a quantitative study. That's what we're used to reading, is articles that give us numbers. This is not that type of study. We want direct questions answered. So what this is what we call a metasynthesis. A metasynthesis is whenever you take different articles or pieces of research and you compile those in order to figure out, how do we explain a theory, or how do we work with a phenomenon? So our first step, or my first step in designing this research study, is to search for journal articles. I used a number of sources, including EBSCOhost, JOSTAR, as well as Google Scholar, in order to find these articles. These are several of the journals used. For example, Transparency International, Government Information Quarterly, and Public Performance and Management Review. These are not the only ones, but these are the ones that provided the most information. Keywords. Whenever I do a metasynthesis, because a metasynthesis is trying to find out all that we can about this particular item, I have to do a keyword search. Keywords are artificial intelligence, public organizations, workplace, public administration, AI ethics, transparency, accountability, challenges, opportunities, and government services. So what I did is, in my search over the course of the last 16 weeks, I discovered 5,000 articles that contain these terms. Then what I did is I figured there's no way that we can do research and compile 5,000 articles. So the next thing I did was start to review abstracts. Those abstracts that didn't apply basically got kicked out of the study. Altogether, I ended up with 17 articles for this particular study. Alright, we also talk about inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. So how do I figure out what information is pertinent? Well, first of all, we want to use stuff that is more modern. So I used studies from 2018 to 2024, and the articles that contain information on the impact on business, employee emotional state, savings costs, and public reaction to AI used by government entities. So exclusion criteria, these are the things that I bounced out of the study. So articles that were not available in full text, duplicate publications, which you will find those a lot, studies conducted before 2018, those with what we call unclear methodologies. I don't know how they're getting their data or how they're getting their information. And those that did not line up with the research objectives, so those 3 questions that I mentioned earlier. Alright, so these are the themes that developed from all of the articles. So first of all, we're going to talk about ethics, bias, data privacy and security, psychosocial impact and role identity, public perception, lack of guidelines, transparency and accountability, AI corruption, efficiency, cost savings, and performance. Alright, competencies needed. This is what your managers need in order to effectively implement an AI system. So first of all, they need technical literacy. So you can't just take any person off the street and say, hey, I want you to be a member of management and I want you to be able to help us implement this technology. It does not work that way. This actually requires collaboration. That means interagency collaboration as well as collaboration with vendors. Ethical. So the managers have to be ethical. So when we talk about things such as bias and we talk about AI corruption, it's not just an external thing. It can be internal, based on the data that you feed to the AI technology, or based upon self-dealing. And then finally, effective communication skills. That's what we lack a lot as managers. We just assume we're going to throw something out to an employee, they're going to accept it. That doesn't happen. A lot of times that's why we get rumblings of disapproval. All right, 2 types of AI. We have generative. That's like your ChatGPT. So whenever you actually generate new content. And then machine learning. So that uses human development and data inputs. Machine learning is where the technology kind of becomes smart. So when I think about that, I think about the Terminator movies. Eventually, those robots or those artificial intelligence technologies are going to take over the world, according to John Connor. But it's not our reality yet. So that's whenever the system actually becomes so smart that it analyzes the data, starts to make decisions. That's where a lot of people have issues. It's when your AI becomes more than just a tool. It starts making decisions that humans make. There's a lot of studies out there, for example, one on Texas teacher evaluations, where a bunch of teachers were actually evaluated on their job performance, and those who didn't perform according to the AI standards that were based on input data were actually fired from their job. They were fired from their job. Of course, a lawsuit comes around, and the reason for that is because those particular teachers had no idea what the criteria was that they were being judged on, and were using a tool to make a human decision. All right, they learn on their own. It's difficult to understand. That's why a lot of people don't really question it until an issue comes up, such as a data breach or personal information theft, because the algorithms are way too complex. So like I mentioned before, that's where ethical issues tend to pop up. Then these technologies are only as good as the person providing the data. For example, if I input incorrect information into the AI system, it's going to come back with a flawed response. And the reason for that flawed response is because it's only going with the data that it has. So if the input is flawed, the output will be flawed. All right, second challenge, bias. We don't really look at this too much when we're working for the state. Maybe we should look into it more. We need to appropriately vet our contractors and our people who are working in AI overseas. So that may mean background checks, that may be understanding what controls we can use if an issue occurs. So if the developer is biased, the data is also biased. So one big thing I found in my study is that there's actually a lack of diversity in the AI community. So what we have is, for example, a lot of white men out there making decisions. Now what that has run into is, for example, there's data out there that suggests that AI technologies that are used for facial recognition are very poor when it comes to identifying faces of minorities. And the reason why is because the data that's input for the training of the system is based on who that community is. Okay, so you have a bunch of, I hate to say this, but white people making decisions and saying, hey, this is what they look like, for example. AI technology mimics the programmer. So we have to understand that it's hard to train emotional intelligence. So that's why a lot of people in the public have issues working with AI when it's a chatbot, because they can only go so far. You ask it a question, it can answer that question. It doesn't have human emotion. All right, and then information that seems harmless could be used by AI to develop the wrong conclusion. So that's what I was talking about before, is we have a situation where the data is only as good as the person that inputs it. All right, data privacy and security. Data breaches are not uncommon. Internal, power holders. We don't think about that a lot. We assume that everybody's ethical, especially managers. Not the case. So power holders are those people that we put in place because we trust them, we expect them to do the right thing, and in reality they might be self-dealing. External, those are scammers who infiltrate the network. And we've seen that happen before. That's why we've implemented things such as VDI, because it's considered to be a more secure environment. Okay, next we need to know that AI can be used as a weapon. We recently did a training on deepfakes, so just understand that that's one thing that can happen. Plus, chatbots can give out incorrect information. I've mentioned that before, and there's potential for mistakes. All right, now we're going to talk about my favorite thing, psychology of management. So, psychosocial impact and role identity. A lot of managers don't understand this, and state leadership doesn't understand this. Some people, actually the majority of us, are where we work. So what happens is we have a situation where, for example, we throw out an idea. We tell the employees, all right, in 3 months, we're going to start using AI. We're going to use it for face-to-face customer experience, things of that nature. Well, it seems all good on paper, but we tend to forget that people who've been here for 20 or 30 years have taken on an identity. It's basically their job. Their job becomes who they are. When I was a kid, I used to always say, school is my life. It became my identity. All right, so employees associate their identity with their job role. They tend to really struggle when resources and job tasks change. That's why we see things such as people saying, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job if AI comes in. They're not ready for adjustment. And they find it difficult to adjust to the new job roles or change. All right, emotions that are associated with change. Dissatisfaction. We see that a million times. Frustration. Deterrence. Fear and worry. This tends to affect those who are less educated most. When we talk about things such as people being taken away from their jobs or losing their jobs, it does impact people, mostly those who are uneducated. So one of the things to know about is we have an opportunity as management to help these people. How do we do that? Provide training, reskilling, assist them with education. We'll talk more about that later, but just understand that if we're going to make a change like this, we need to have appropriate resources in place. All right. They feel better. Research suggests that employees feel better when they have more input or control. So ask the questions. Go to them, say, how do you feel about this? What kind of technologies do you think would work best in our current position? They're more comfortable with the transition if they have resources available. Training, documentation, guidelines, support for management. Often we see AI technologies as a nuisance. That's what a lot of employees see, especially if they're struggling to learn new technologies. They may feel relief that strenuous job tasks are completed by AI. So we do have a positive perspective where there are some employees that say, hey, you know what, this is really helping me. I don't have to do these day-to-day tasks that are keeping me from doing my regular job. Good example of that would be if we implemented something that's going to take care of the ICC process. They're not going to have to go in and check boxes. And I believe we already did that. Employees believe AI is spying on them. That is a true thing. I mean, we have to think about it this way. We know what technology can do. We know that cameras are a thing. We also know that there are chat records when we use Teams, for example. So those are some things to understand. It's not just paranoia. Employees have a valid reason for thinking this. Plus we see every once in a while in the news situations that come up like this. All right. Employees may feel lost And when they feel like they're lost or like they're not catching on or understanding, then that's when they face more of an identity threat. And if the employee sees the technology as invaluable, then they're more likely to see it as less of a threat. But that comes on the shoulders of management. If we're just giving you a tool and saying, here you go, that's not very helpful. We have to instill in our employees an understanding of why we're doing this. What benefit is it going to have to you? And I don't think we do that enough, just to be honest. All right, public perception. Research suggests that many individuals prefer the convenience of AI. It is often difficult to tell whether they're communicating with AI because we're getting so much better with the data input and things of that nature. Others prefer to speak with a human because they see them as able to use judgment, and it eliminates the possibility of a data breach in their mind. We're not saying that that's necessarily true. And one of the biggest fears is the amount of data that's housed on servers by the government. We have huge amounts of data and no really good methods as of right now to figure out what data to hold and what data to get rid of. That's something that we'll always struggle with as managers. All right. And then the majority of vendor companies that assist with AI are overseas organizations. Now, the research also suggests that a lot of times when we're using contractors like we do at the state from overseas, it's because we don't have people in the U.S. that have that talent base. So we've got to understand that we can't do things like if there's a major problem, extradite someone to the U.S. if they're from India. So we've got to make sure that we vet them properly. All right, lack of AI guidelines. All the research suggests that all this tends to be in-house. There is no standard, no uniform standard. It is a new technology, so that's basically up to individual organizations. The creation of ethical AI guidelines has been left up to self-governing bodies. There's research where Hagendorf actually did an analysis of 22 ethical guidelines, and he found that the most common concepts or themes referred to in the literature were accountability, privacy, and fairness. And we just need to understand that. Political abuse is also missing from the guidelines. How do we handle that? A lot of times when we see deep fakes or we see situations where AI is manipulated, it's in political situations. So for example, someone may put in data that's not true. I always think of the movie Tommy Boy, how all those dead people are showing up on the records. But there's nothing out there that tells you how to deal with these situations or how we're actually going to take care of violations. And then the state action doctrine. This is a new concept. In the past, vendors could say, well, I don't really understand what the state does, so I shouldn't be held accountable or liable if there's an issue. Well, there's new legislation in the works called the state action doctrine, where we might be able to hold those vendors accountable if there's an issue. So that's one of the things that came up in the research. All right, so we're going to talk about risks posed to those the data represent. That includes discrimination, disparate treatment, discontinuance of vital services, state action doctrine, which I mentioned previously. These are what we need to be able to consider someone a state actor. So, private party performs a function that is traditionally and exclusively performed by the state. State directs or compels the private party's conduct, means that we're okaying it. And the private party acts jointly with the government. Transparency and accountability. Who do we hold accountable when there's a legal breach of duty? Their European Union, for example, there's a study out there in 2018. They actually came up with something called the General Data Protection Regulation. These are regulations that require firms to give individuals a right to a human review of a decision made by AI. Problem with that is the increased cost. So that's something to take into consideration when we come up with an AI technology we want to implement. What do we want to have as a check and balance? That may not be cost effective for us. All right, the primary purpose is to protect consumer rights. And the next thing I want to talk about is more transparency in terms of AI design. This is difficult due to the complexity of the algorithms. No one's going to understand them. Half the time the developers don't understand when there's machine learning involved. Complete transparency can lead to privacy issues or data breaches. So if anyone says, hey, we need to be able to see everything that AI is doing. No. Must be mindful of quality of the data, including its accuracy, completeness, uncertainty, timeliness, and assumptions. Those are some of the things that we actually can disclose. And variables and margin of error should also be provided. All right, AI corruption. I mentioned this before. Don't always think that everybody in management is honest, because they aren't. First of all, it's not always a result of a breach or lax security measures, because sometimes it's internal. Can be caused intentionally by a power holder. And I've kind of outlined for us what I already mentioned of who they are. Employees can also provide bad data. Corruptible form of AI. We have two different types of AI, rule-based, as well as machine learning. So rule-based is like ABC equals D. So you can corrupt it if you set it up in favor of one person. And then with machine learning, it's where the technology uses the data to learn on its own. If the data is bad, it's going to learn incorrectly. All right, efficiency. When we talk to customers, we're getting into the benefits and opportunities here. So it is efficient. So AI is available 24/7, whereas humans are not most of the time. It provides quick and reliable information. And there was a focus group study that reported that 91% of interviewees indicated that the presence of AI in their workplace, these are actually employees, provided a feeling of relief. And it also helps lighten the workload, which I've mentioned before. All right, cost savings. Costs are heavy up front. You know that. May cost several $1 million. Small price to pay to avoid employee burnout, and once it's set up, usually it's pretty smooth. Next, there's a need for less employees in order to save costs and costs of benefits and pay, and it helps to avoid employee burnout. We mentioned that before. All right, when we talk about performance, it's better at problem solving than its human counterparts. Enhanced task performance. Basically, it's quicker. Provide better, more efficient services to citizens. AI tools can be used for decision making. They're using that in the criminal justice field right now. And it can be used for fraud protection and what they call predictive modeling, which is predicting trends and unusual occurrences in the data. So that's what cybersecurity could technically use. All right. Implementation. Employees and managers must recognize both the risks and opportunities of AI integration in the workplace. So we need to have a focus group, or we need to have a sit down with employees and explain it. That's what we never do enough. Management must conduct periodic reviews of the areas of work they're responsible for. Because we have to understand, not everything needs AI or an AI solution. Some things we need humans for. All right, management, let's see. Review applications you're responsible for and determine the business case. You know, what's the need for the AI here? Employees must ensure that their questions and data provided to the AI technology are clear and support the mission of the organization. And then we have to think about the impacts, consequences of AI-generated solutions. We have to think about that in terms of risk and possible consequences. So you've got to always think when you're in management, you've always got to instill that in your employees as well. All right, so now we're going to talk about the analysis and the results. What should we do to have a streamlined implementation? First of all, the majority of articles reviewed in this study were literature reviews. They're already telling us what's out there. Only 2 of the articles contain quantitative analysis. So quantitative, once again, is when we look at statistics. Ethical concerns and lack of guidelines on both implementation and policies can protect against privacy and security issues. As these tools continue to evolve, there's a need to put safeguards in place. And based on the information contained within the study, there's significant support for implementation in the public sector. All right, these are my recommendations. It's a huge list. This is not page 1. This is just page 1. So first one, focus on resources we already have and increasing internal capabilities. That's not just about the technology, that's about the people. So we need a very people-centered methodology. All right. Evaluate the skill set and determine who's the right fit to work with AI technologies. We have some people that just can't do it. Or if they try to, they're just not going to be interested. So it's going to go nowhere. Third, determine available resources and training for employees. What do we have out there that we can, for example, reskill employees who can't do this technology work? So what do we have available for them in terms of training and maybe projects? Provide employees with control over the tools they use on a regular basis. There's actually studies out there that I mentioned before that show that if they have some sort of sense of control, they're going to be more likely to want that AI solution. All right. When onboarding new employees, there's a need to examine their interpersonal skills and find out what types of communication work best for them. Because AI, you're going to be communicating on a regular basis what your expectations are and how to use the items. Let employees have a say in the changes that are being made and what types of AI technologies are introduced. So don't just go into a conference and say, hey guys, next month we're going to use this tool. Because they need to understand why. They need to understand that this is not just, hey, we're going to dictate this tool. This is, hey, we're trying to make your life easier and your job more enjoyable. All right. Create an advisory board. We've already done that. They can vet the types of AI that we're going to use, and they can also make suggestions. Work with affiliate contracting agencies to hire a business analyst to create a set model of guidelines. That's my big thing, is we can use business analysts, such as a contractor, to assist us with creating that. It can contain ethical guidelines and what to do if someone violates the code. So what do we do if we don't have someone under us as a full-time state employee? You know, do we cut that contracting agency? Do we let go of that contractor? Do we do further investigation? What do we do? All right. Next, organizational AI governance. So I would suggest that we have a creation of rules and practices and processes and technical tools that we use to make sure the organization's use aligns with our strategies, objectives, values, and meets necessary legal requirements. All right, and then quarterly audits. Audits are very important. We need to make sure that we do spot checks to make sure that the AI is working properly and that the updates are occurring as they should be. We also need to understand who's doing what, and an audit can do that. Determine in which areas AI are needed and what type of technology. Because there's all kinds of technology out there. New developers should be introduced to our ethical guidelines. Contact the Department of Michigan Cybersecurity for assistance with initiating security protocols. Contractors should use VDI instead of the regular VPN access. All right. We should attempt to work with contracting agencies such as Deloitte to recruit those best suited for development and oversight. What I found in the research is a lot of state organizations as well as the federal government can't do it on their own. They don't have the employees with the skill set. In order to, let's see, we need to tap into that foreign talent market, use of work visas. In order to ensure that there is funding for contractors, we need to basically meet with BOSS. That's basically our budget team. So we need to talk to them before hiring, and we can also use this information to compare the costs, overall cost of savings, and we can do like a 1-year look back on that to see, is AI implementation really saving us money? Because that's one of the big goals. We need to use agile methodologies for procurement, and in the past I've used DevOps to make sure that our tasks are straight. That's something that we may want to do. Ask what tasks the employees need additional support on, and what areas of service need improvement, because that's something that we're going to rely on customers for. We're going to go back and ask them, but first the information needs to come from our own people. Offer training and reskilling, I've mentioned that several times. Tuition reimbursement from the department if the person needs a higher level of education or certificate. In addition, send them to the trainings that are offered by the state on a regular basis. Perform an evaluation of our current state of processes and procedures and find out their effectiveness. Then you can compare that to post-implementation. I already mentioned the 1-year look back, and we may also want to use a quality analyst or two. The Client Service Center uses them. Maybe we could borrow a quality analyst, or maybe we could go to Deloitte and say, can you get us a good quality analyst to assist with this? All right, limitations. We always have to talk about limitations of our studies when we do research. So first of all, it was very narrowly focused. So we're looking at public sector. What we should do in the future is also examine private sector's use, because that may actually be able to inform us as to how they do it and how we should do it. And then there's a need for the examination of more quantitative studies, like what statistics are out there. We might want to look at data breaches. We may want to look at privacy issues. We can look at that in terms of state numbers, because a lot of that information is shared with the U.S. government, and it's also, out there for public record. So those are some things that I would suggest looking at. That's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions? No? Do you think this is something that we probably should have looked at before getting as far as we did?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
So nothing?
Nope.
Okay, well, thank you.